My name is Dr. David Hosbroch, Language and Information Officer at the Centre for the Scots Lead in Perth. I would like to speak about the Scots Lead and its Sibnest Hill historical spearings. Firstly, what is Scots? In modern Scotland, Scots is the name for the by-leads gathered together, and is kent by the other names of Doric, Lallans and Scotch for by. And going by where ye bide, ye micht already better ken a mere hame about name sic as Borders, Buchan, Dundonian, Glasgow or Shetland, to name a wheen. See, when gathered all together, the Scots by-leads is cried the Scots Lead. Scots is counted a branch of the Germanic family of Leads, and is, like its sister tongue Southron, sprung fae the Old Angles Lead. Both Old Angles and its dochter Scots has been spoken in Southland and Easter Scotland, the Lowlands, for the 7th century AD. There are mentions of this lead to be found, for instance, in the runic carvings on the Rivel Cross in Dumfriesshire, bigot in the 8th century AD. Scots caithed an awe in Orkney and Shetland as early as the 14th century, and got to be the most spoken tongue in the arts in the 17th and 18th centuries. It was brocht till Ulster in Ireland for as early as the mid-16th century. Today, there are 5 heed by-leads of Scots: Island, Norland, Midland, Southland and Ulster. And within ilk yin of their by-leads, there mere hame about variants, just like any other lead. The by-leads was first clearly set out on a cart by James Murray in the 1870s, but the oldest spearings into them can be found in the old statistical account set forth in the 1790s, though this isn't all-comprehending. Scots shouldn't, of course, be tagled with Scots Gaelic, that's a Celtic tongue and the sister lead of Erse. The earliest text in Scots to win our belongs the 14th century, though there are a number of Latin charters with vernacular glosses in them that dates back to the 12th century. In 1371, Robert the Stewart became King of Scots as Robert II, and it was at his court that the lead was futhi a kingly patronage. John Barber, regarded as the father of literature in Scots, wrote the epic The Bruce in the 1370s. It wasn't long afore the range of Scots was stinted for literature the length of the administration. Folk started writing charters and contracts in Scots, and sign enactments in the King's Council and the Parliament forby. By the mid-15th century, the use of Scots in their areas and for writing history was taken for granted. The orthography of the written language in Scotland differed sharply from the one used in England. The Scots used Scots Secretahon, while the Ingles used Italian's Hon, and both sides found it a fash to read the others. The Scots took on the Italian's Hon after the yoking of the countries in 1707. But the fact that the kingly family of Scotland was Scots-speaking for the time of Robert II, down to the reign of Charles I, that died in 1649, was directly sib to the stoning of the lead. Now, the Scots didn't seem to have been muckle fashed with language names in the Middle Ages. The speech of the Lowlands was in general kent as Ingles in the vernacular, or in Latin as Teutonica, that is, German. Instead, it was the Southrons that seemed fashed with sorting yin lead for another, and as early as the 1360s, a current at least was calling the Lowland tongue Scots, by as onython spoken in England. Though the case in awe of the Ingles herald that came to the Scots court in Edinburgh in 1560 was addressed by the French Queen Dowager Marie de Guise in Scots, but had to request that the court had gone in French instead because he couldn't understand Scots. And this makes it we'll seen who four Scots and Southron had cindered. By the doup end of the 15th century, the Lowland Scots had themselves started crying their lead Scots in recognition it had grown its own gate. In this way, the Scots was typical of a general movement in Europe towards more thicker definitions of identity. For instance, in the Law Countries, the lead had long been kent as Dutch, that is, German. But starting in the 1480s, a current folk started crying the lead Netherlands to distinguish it for the sib-lead spoken in Germany, though folk carried on using Max on the name Dutch as late as the 17th century. In sick-like fashion, the name Ingalls was whiles used as an umbrella term for both the Southron and Scots leads. This is a heed historical spearers wants to tack into. When a chronicler speaks about Ingalls or a text in Ingalls, just what does the mean? Take, for instance, the description by Sir Andrew Keith in Sweden in 1578, where he described reading a letter for the Regent Morton of Scotland to the King of Sweden. Whilk His Majesty understood weel, because His Majesty can speak and understand good Ingalls. Clearly, in this context, the term Ingalls can only mean the lead of Scotland. In 1707, England and Scotland was joined by the Treaty of Union in an incorporating political union cried United Kinrick of Great Britain. In reality, England had annexed Scotland with terms. This union had and has yet a foregone outcome for the Scots lead community. The Hegians of Scotland set out to meld to the Southron way of life for to compete for places in power. This meant for leading the Scots lead for Ingalls. Scots was now reclassified as a provincial by-lead, or Ingalls for political etals. We can compare this with Scandinavia that was joined in the political union of Kalmar, headed by the Kingship of Denmark. Under their own union, Norse was whiles classed as a by-lead of Danes for political reasons, as was Swedish afore Sweden loused itself of the union. In the Netherlands and all, the Kenspekel Frieslied was often classed as a by-lead of Dutch in the interests of melling the Fries folk with the Dutch. The Union of 1707 meant that the lead got more and more cindered for political power and for money domains, such as administrative writing and formal settings. But the feck of the folk, the toon labourers and landward peasantry, even officials hame about, carried on speaking Scots as a mother tongue. There was, however, a cultural walking earth it again the political union that led to the bloom of poem and sang in Scots, heed at first by Olin Ramsay and sign by Robert Ferguson and Robert Burns. Tack for a whaling, the weel-kent Jacobite sang the wee German lairdy. The Jacobites considered George of Hanover as nae mair nor a laird that worked at his own land and was aneath the mense of a real king. In the following 12 verses, they get a rare tear out of him doing the gardening. Wha the deal have we gotten for a king but a wee German lairdy? And when we gaed to bring him hame, he was delving in his kail yerdie, shuchin kail and laying leaks, without the hose and but the breeks, and up his beggar duds he cleeks, the wee German lairdy. And he's clappit doon in our Gidman's chair, the wee German lairdy, and he's brocht footh of foreign trash, and dibbled them in his yerdie. He's pooed the rose of English loons, and broken the harp of Irish clunes, but our Scots thistle will jag his thumbs, the wee German lairdy. As a bit political satire, it is affy scaly and gives us an insight to the political world of the Scots-speaking community. Tack tent to the spelling conventions such as OW and OU, the both of them interchangeable, but sounded oo in Scots. For by GH is pronounced as a fricative or guttural ch. Tack tent and awe to the words loons, clowns and thumbs, that only works as a rhyme when I sound it as Scots oo. There were a chapbook tradition and all, stories, moral and religious tracts, and political commentar, all in Scots, that done good in the 18th and 19th centuries. Together with the poetry and sang, Their wellsprings gies the historical sphere a valuable window on the world picture of the Lowland Scots speaker. So one ca canny afore making hourly general comments about sacred British culture, language and identity. I've bored into the history of Scots at hame and how it was sibbed to Lingles, but Scots folk, of course, had dealings with others in Europe that was particular strang when Scotland was yet a freestoning country. The heedmaist Erts in this respect was France, the Law Countries and Scandinavia. It was natural that wherever the Scots gaed, they spak their mither tongue and all. But did host countries recognise Scots or mak use of it? This is another subject that has been touched on, but hasn't been muckle speared out, because the history of Scots has been our ta'en up with the compare with Ingles, and the Treaty of Union covered the political identity of Scots culture and language with a blanket of Britishness. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, a handful of ambassadors, envoys and visitors came to Scotland and left accounts of their opinions of the lead. The weel-kent scriver Don Pedro de Ayala, Castile and Aragon, for 1498, said that King James IV spak Scots as his Hamelt tongue, and that it differed for Southron as muckle as Catalan for Spanish. French visitors of the mid-16th century made sick-like compare between Scots and the French byleads. Ambassadors for the States General of the United Netherlands described Scots in their reports in the 1590s forby. It is apparent that the all Kent Scots was a Kenspeckle lead at the court of Scotland. But what about Scots outland? We ken that the Scots community settled at Camp Veer in the Netherlands in the 17th century had their own kirk, and there are references to the lead. The same evidence can be found for the large Langstonin settlement of Scots at Birren in Norrowa. Interpretators was appointed for the Scots lead at Dansken, Germany in 1597, in Denmark in 1639, and for Stockholm, Sweden in 1680. For by them, there were a screed of Scots exiles to Germany and Scandinavia, chiels such as John Wedderburn for Dundee and John Gough for St Andrews, that our set religious works for Danes, German and other leads into Scots. And there good evidence for the use of the lead among the Scots envoys and kingly officials in Sweden all through the 17th century and ayont. I would like to speak a bit about some of the things that historians and spearers wants to tak into regards language. Watch out for changes in spellings. I've seen some Victorian and more recent scrivers that isna Scots describe some material as written in, quote, bad Ingles. Their documents dates for the most part for the 17th century, and it should be seen as a time in the deed thraw for Scots writing. The Tacononia Southron Bible after 1560, the Losa kingly patronage after the personal union of 1603, and the hour-gone hod that Lunnon had on the printing press, led Scots to tackle in more and more conventions of Southron spelling. By the mid-17th century, we often find documents written in a mail of Southron and Scots forms, with key items of Southron vocabulary, such as from and most, taking the place of Scots frae and maist. Their language choices tells us muckle about the cultural allegiances, etals and mental world of the bodies and communities making them, and sic documents should be seen as valuable evidence in themselves. On the other hand, they folk and bodies that stood again change for langer, whiles dismissed as old farrant, has muckle to show us who Scots' cultural allegiances held going. Watch out for language that looks like Ingles but isn't. There are instances of rhymes and poems for Scotland that doesn't make sense until sounded as Scots. Instances of their verses can be seen on Scots funeral and monumental inscriptions. And consider in awe the Scots names for countries and places. Scots speakers, for instance, Kent, Trondheim and Norrowa as Drunton, Danzig in Poland as Dansken, and Russia as Rushi. You'll find there and many other names in both official papers and in 19th century press articles. When one tack tent i the political context that language commentators is writing in forby. Tak, for instance, John Mayer, the weel-kent Latin historian of the 16th century, that described the Leeds of Scotland as Ingles and Erse. But their names masks a language situation altogether mair quirky. Here, the speaker wants to keep in mind that Mayer was all for the political union of England and Scotland, and his interest was in playing up alike language between the twa. By the same gate, Jamie the Saxt, that spak and often rate tracks in Scots, Yince famously described the island of Britain till his Ingles Parliament as all joined in the A lead. Ingles commentators has often been ta'en in by this kingly patter. Again, we need to be wary of the political context. Jamie the Saxt, a chiel that had cultivated Scots as a leader for 1603, socht the political union of his twa kinricks after the own date. And etling to this political end, he played up ony alikes, played down ony differs, and made sure that Gaelic and Welsh wasn't even quoted. I should mention the use of the Bible in Scotland. Scotland turned a Calvinist kintra, at least official-wise, in 1560, and the nearest our setting of the Bible to hon was a Southron. A cause of this, historians has mostly ta'en on the idea that religious worship gaed on in Ingles. However, the use of Scots in religious worship is an awfu' unspirit subject. Kirk of Scotland ministers that set forth their sermons had them Englished, to use the term of the time, with AE on the bigger publishing market in England. But Ingles visitors was bumbazed with the different lead and often fun at a sair fecht to foley a cert Scots sermon. This is because the ministers, though using a Southron Bible, paraphrased the text for their congregations, and Scots readers pronounced the text in a way altogether different for folk in England. A common complaint of Scots parochianers was again ony minister that lippen on a Bible-led sermon, for the exact reason that it didn't matter the spoken lead. This mun be for paraphrasing seems to have been a common haunt until the 19th century. Lastly, we should tak tent and awe to the changes going on in the 19th century. On the yin hon, there are muckle reservoir of mostly unused material for the popular press in Scotland. Mony thousands of articles was written in Scots in they days, dealing with all kind of subjects, politics comprehended. Ta'en all together with the chapbook material and poetry and sang, their papers compline us to spira with a most valuable wellspring. On the other hand, the inbringing a state inspection of the skills for 1845, and the threep that both the teacher and pupil should tak their skilling through the Southern lead, led at the hinner end to further wearing down the Scots speech. All the same, their skill inspectors' reports can be another valuable wellspring for spearers. Gin you're new to Scots, and you would like to look at further instances of the lead, there are puckle print books to hon. For instance, the printed version of the Registers of the Privy Council of Scotland, running from 1545 to 1690, and the printed Acts of the Parliaments of Scotland, going from the 15th century to 1707. This yin is online forby. There are a whole screed of articles in Scots and history that kithes in the journal Scottish Language, and gin you'd like to read both vernacular and lettered Scots prose, Lallan's, the journal of the Scots Lead Association, would be a good pint to start for. Lastly, I can freely recommend the Concise Scots Dictionary as an altogether necessary tool for any spearer dealing with material for Scotland. This plenishes the reader with an etymological and historical reference for the whole time between the 12th century and the present.